I am going to talk about a little thing that we all can do, that if we do it, it has a really big impact on our lives and, frankly, on our culture, which is very needed today. I should explain that I'm coming to this topic. I tend to talk a lot about relationships, and I come to these topics not as the normal person to stand up on stage and talk about relationships, because normally you have, a pastor or a marriage therapist or a counselor or somebody who's a psychology degree. Anybody here studying psychology, sociology, stuff like that? Okay, you guys are my heroes. I didn't. I was actually a Wall Street analyst. I was an analyst by training, and ended up, God did a right-hand turn, as so often happens, and ended up using that analytical background in a very different way. I do these big research studies to try to dig out what are the little things that we tend to miss, that we just tend to be blind to. We don't realize that once you're aware of them and your eyes are open to them, it actually changes a lot. It's little stuff that has a big difference. And I've identified one of those factors, really excited about it. It's actually my latest book, which is called The Kindness Challenge, which just came out just a couple of weeks ago, so I'm still new talking about it. To introduce this concept of how powerful this is, I want to take a right-hand turn and talk about action movies for a minute. I need to confess that I am not the normal girl who likes chick flicks. My daughter over Christmas asked if we could watch Pride and Prejudice together. And I'm like, it doesn't have enough car chases and explosions, I feel like I need to turn in my girl card. Like, the chick flicks just aren't my thing. I like the action movies. And am I the only one? Like, is anybody else here like a Marvel movie person? Oh, please tell me you guys aren't too cool for that. Seriously. Is anybody else like Marvel movies? Please tell me. Okay, good. Now, in all seriousness, I know it sounds kind of stupid, but this is one of those things that, growing up, I don't know about you, but I always wished I had a superpower, right? Like, how cool would that be? And I'll tell you now that I'm a mom, my daughter is 16 years old, which means pretty soon she'll be sitting where you guys are, and that's like freaking me out. And now that I'm a mom, I really wish that I had super hearing and super sight to see through walls. I'm sure a lot of parents feel the same way. And as I was starting this research, I realized, I missed it. God has already given us a superpower. We don't see it, we don't realize it, but that superpower is called kindness. If you look at what the Bible talks about kindness, what the Bible says about kindness, it is incredibly supernatural in its impact. And it seems so mundane and so vague, and we hear about it all the time in church, we read about it in the Bible. We completely miss the power of this. Now, obviously, it's not our power, right? It's God's power working through us. But when we do what he says to do and offer kindness to others, it truly has a supernatural component, a supernatural impact. And has anybody noticed today we kind of need a little more kindness? This is like strange how unkind our culture has gotten. You guys can be a part of changing that. And I'm going to explain this because there is a multiplier effect here that I'll explain in a minute. Let me give you an example of just how powerful this is. This is one of the things that got me started on this particular research project. Years ago, I had released a book called For Women Only, which was a big study to help women understand men. And it became this big, unexpected bestseller. I was speaking at a lot of women's conferences, and I would always get this question at these women's conferences. And I got this, again, at this one big conference I was doing at this church in Colorado. And at the end of the session, this woman stood up, and she said, Shaunti, you've explained the findings that you found, that men need respect so much and they need appreciation so much they would actually give up feeling loved to get it if they had to. That's one of the big surprises. It was one of the big surprises for me. And she said, but you're saying my husband needs to know that I appreciate him, but what if I don't? Right? What if he's hurt me? What if he's just not a good guy anymore? What if? And I realized I didn't really know how to answer that question very well. And I told her, well, first, we are commanded to show him appreciation in marriage, just like he's commanded to show us love, even if we're not particularly lovable that day. So that's the first answer, is that there's an obedience component here, but the reality is that if we do the things that God asks us to do, even when we don't feel like it, often we'll find our feelings changing, we'll find the situation changing. And I said, try this. And I gave her an example of what eventually became what I tested on this survey that I called the 30-day kindness challenge. And I said, try this 30-day kindness challenge. And I outlined the steps, which I'll explain in just a second. And I outlined the steps, and she was just like, ugh, because she was ready to get divorced. There was all this stuff going on in their marriage. It was just awful. And she sat down, and, as often happens in those events, I fly away. I don't know the end of the story. 3 years later, I'm back in a completely different part of Colorado at a completely different women's event. And a woman stands up and asks a very similar question. What if I don't respect my husband? What if I don't appreciate him? And I said, try this, the 30-day kindness challenge. And she's like, all right. And she sat down, and another woman stood up, but she didn't ask a question. She looked at the first woman and she said, if you do that, you'll find it changes everything. And she looked at me and she said, you won't remember me, but 3 years ago, you came to my church in another part of the state. And I asked a very similar question, and you gave me a very similar answer. And I wanted to ignore everything that you said. But I didn't want my kids to grow up in a broken home, and so I did it. And it changed everything. And she started to cry. And of course, I'm like, starting to cry. And she said, what happened as I did this, I didn't want to, but I just decided to do it out of obedience to God. And as I reached out in kindness in these specific ways, which like I said, I'll explain in a second, in these specific ways, suddenly I noticed that my husband seemed a little softer and he got less defensive. And then he started to reach back out to me in a few ways. And then that made it a little easier for me to reach back out to him and overlook some wrongs and, look on some rights. And then he got less defensive, and then he got softer and reached back out to me, and it became a positive cycle. And she said, now 3 years later, we love being married. We have a great marriage. We're actually now marriage mentors at our church, helping other couples walk through this and saying, if we can get through it, you can too. Kindness is incredibly powerful. It is absolutely transformative. Something happens when you apply it that is supernatural and miraculous, and we miss it. But it is just as miraculous, just as supernatural as the Israelites walking out into the desert and finding breakfast in the morning. It is just that level of miracle. But because it's not as visible and tangible, we miss it. So let's not miss it. Because let me tell you, imagine for just a second, the impact that woman had, those actions that she did and the impact on her husband. Imagine that impact in her life now multiplied by multiple people and the people that they impact and the people that they impact. There is something about this that also tends to spread because now she has learned something about herself, about how she used to be far more unkind than she realized. Her eyes were opened to the fact that as she had not been as helpful to her husband as she thought she had been, she realized, oh my gosh, there's so many things in me that I am doing to sabotage the relationship. And that eye-opening thing, she then takes to all her relationships. Imagine how that starts to multiply. And imagine if that were to spread amongst people in the body of Christ. Imagine how that would change things in our culture today. I found in my studies, I went back, this is the 8th big national study that I've done. And a number of years ago, I went back and I looked at all of the studies that I had done over the years, these big nationally representative surveys. And I found that there was this common thread running through all of them, and it was fascinating to me. And I was trying to figure out what is it that I'm seeing that's a common denominator across all of these, and I realized it's this: whether we thrive in our life and whether we thrive in our relationships, it turns out it is far more correlated to how we treat other people than how we ourselves are treated. Let me say that again. Whether we thrive in our life, whether we thrive in our relationships, it is far more correlated to how we are treating others than how we ourselves are being treated. Now, we as believers, we hear that and we kind of go, yes, I totally see that. That is totally true. And yet, we tend not to live that way, right? We tend not to do that. And certainly our culture tells us not to live that way. Our culture says, if you are being mistreated, you got to stand up for yourself. You stand up for your rights. It's not fair. You got to make it fair. And there is something that stirs deep in me. I don't know about you guys. You guys are probably nicer than me. But there's something deep in me that stirs when I get mistreated. I'm like, I want to get the head wag on. I'm not very good at it, but I want to get the head wag on, you know? I mean, and there's something in me that really wants to sort of buck up. And yet, God has a different way. It's all about being kind. It's sort of a one-size-fits-all answer. If you want to be better at friendships, be kind. If you want to have more enjoyable, more successful dating relationships, be kind. You want to be better at your job? Be kind. You want to eventually, when you get married, you want a better marriage? Be kind. We found if you want a better sex life in your marriage, be kind. Like statistically. We tested that, by the way. If you want to be better pretty much at anything that God has called you to do, that's the answer. And yet, here's the catch. Here's the big issue. For this to work, here's the problem. You have to be kind when you least want to be. That's the problem. For this to work, for you to truly thrive in your life and your relationships, you have to be kind when you least want to be. Let me put it in very personal terms. Your teacher, your professor, is being completely unfair about your grades. Not that that ever happens here, I'm sure, right? But you feel like your teacher is being completely unfair about your grades, and you've explained, and they are not budging an inch, they are not being nice about it. You have to be kind. When your roommate is doing something that is bugging the stew out of you, and you want to respond in kind, you can't. You have to be kind instead. Your step-parents are driving you bananas. Your stepmother is driving you bananas. And she is cold, she is maybe passive-aggressive, she uses the guilt trip. You can't respond that way. You're called to be kind. And as you do, that's what God is going to allow us to thrive. Now, this, by the way, you might be thinking, but there are some situations that's like enabling bad behavior. Believe me, I'm not a fan of enabling bad behavior. There are situations where strength is needed, where boundaries are needed. Now listen, here's the key though. If boundaries are truly needed, then usually applying those boundaries and actually having strength in that situation, that is usually the kindest thing that you can do for that person, because it is preventing them from destroying their own emotional equilibrium or the relationship or whatever it is. Guys, we don't have an out on this. Even when it is so difficult, we don't have an out. Jesus doesn't give us an out. Now, quick jog. You guys have heard, obviously, everybody's heard of the golden rule. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Everybody in the world knows the golden rule. We teach it. We say it's a sweet sentiment. It's a great way to live. You know what? You look at Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount. It is not a sweet sentiment. Let me read those. It's very familiar words, I'm sure, to everybody in this room. But let me just read this scripture and listen to this with new ears for just a minute. For those of you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, give them your shirt as well. Give to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. I'm sorry, that's a hard one for me. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Listen to these next words with new ears. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. If you lend to those who you expect to repay you, what credit is that? Sinners do that. But love your enemies. Do good to them. Lend to them without expecting to be paid back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Jesus is talking about those situations that drive you nuts. He is actually talking not about general society, not about the kind of situations where it's easy to be kind. He is specifically and only talking about the situations where it is difficult to be kind, where there's active cruelty, active meanness, active injustice against you. And what he says is, if you're being sweet and kind to the people who are kind to you, you don't get credit. Sorry, no points, right? You have to actually instead treat those people that are being actively cruel to you in the kind and grace-filled way you wish they were treating you. That's what that says. It's really powerful. And it's all made possible because of God's love for us. We don't have that power in ourselves. And that's how God loves us. And by this, Jesus says, this is how people are going to know that you follow me. This is it. The evidence that we follow Christ, he says, is a life marked by one thing: loving kindness. That's it. That is the evidence. Now, here's the problem. And this is what I realized about myself and what I saw in all the study group. We had more than 700 people in this particular study group. And we kind of think we already are kind. We sort of think that that's just a hallmark of our lives already. Like it's a big deal for us. We're believers, right? We want to be kind. We want to live like Jesus. We kind of already are. That was the biggest change of that woman in Colorado. Is that she realized she had been sabotaging her relationship. There was all these ways that she had been actively responding to her husband in ways that it was no wonder he was getting defensive. It was no wonder there were problems. She had to work on herself. She was completely blind to the fact that there were ways she was unkind and negative every single day. You know what? We have the same blindness. We have no idea we are not the people of kindness that we think we are. We need a training ground to become those people. So let me explain the 30-day kindness challenge, because that is our training ground. Kindness, it turns out, is made up of 3 different things. When you boil it all down, there's a lot of different things you could say what it means to be kind, but really it means these 3 things at the very, very basic level. First, it means withholding unkindness. withholding negativity, withholding that unkind spirit. Second, it means to share praise and affirmation and words of kindness and to share positivity, like it's withholding the negative and giving the positive. And it's doing stuff. It's doing actions of generosity, doing actions of kindness, taking action. Really, those three things, ultimately, everything boils down to that. So here's what the 30-day kindness challenge is, and this is what we tested on the survey. And we had this study group of 700 people go through different iterations of it, and we did before and after surveys. It was a big, expensive process, but in the end, this is what ended up working and working really well. And I would suggest that you seriously think about this. And if you forget what I'm saying, go to jointhekindnesschallenge.com after this. And you can even sign up. It's all free. It's just a big portal that somebody built for us. You can sign up to take the 30-day kindness challenge and get 30 days of reminder emails. So here's what it is. Pick one person that you want a better relationship with. Just one, by the way. That's really important. Don't try to do this too broadly. It turns out when you do this with one person, that becomes the training ground. That becomes the eye-opening thing for you. Maybe it's your roommate. Maybe it's a friend that you've been having a bit of a difficult situation with recently, or a boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe it's that stepmother, right? Whoever it is, pick that one person. And for 30 days, do these three things. First, don't say anything negative about that person, either to them or about them to somebody else. That is often where we sabotage our relationships, isn't it? Because and let me just say, for example, if I was doing this for my husband, for example, I can be very sweet to my husband, but if I go to my girlfriends at work and I complain about what he did, I don't realize I am training myself to be an unkind person, and I am sabotaging how I feel about my husband. So that's the first element, nothing negative. Second thing, every day for 30 days, to find something that you can sincerely praise, sincerely affirm about that person, and tell them and tell somebody else. And it could be something very little, but find it every day and tell not just them, but somebody else. And you're going to find your feelings start to change. The third thing is to do one small action of kindness or generosity. You know, you don't feel like it, but your stepmother needs 15 minutes on the phone with you, and you really don't want to give her that 15 minutes, but you give her that 15 minutes anyway. Just a little action of generosity. What we found, if you do this for 30 days, 89% of relationships improved. That is a huge number in social research. Why is that? Why is that number so high? 89% of relationships. It's because what's happening is it's impacting the other person for sure. But the biggest thing that it's doing is it's completely changing you. What are some of the ways that it's changing you? One of the things that it does is it gives you a new appreciation for them. Like you start having appreciation you didn't have before. Because think about it for just a minute. If you're irritated with someone and you tell them you're irritated and you tell somebody else you're irritated, are you going to be more or less irritated? Yeah, we all know the answer to that, right? But if you're irritated and you refuse to talk about it, you refuse to share that complaint that you really want to have about your roommate or whatever, and instead, you're looking for things to praise, and you find it. And it's not like it's new. It was there all along. You just really weren't giving them credit for it. And you share those things, and you share it with that person and with somebody else, and you do that daily, every day, day in and day out. Are you going to be more or less irritated? Less. Everybody knows the answer to that. That's one of the biggest things that changes. And it's one of the biggest things that we have to confront in ourselves because, man, we love to vent, don't we? When there are issues, we love to complain about others. We don't think of it this way, but that's what we're doing. I do a lot of women's leadership seminars, and one of my corporate clients is a very high-level woman in corporate America and is known for being a great person to work with. Everybody loves to work with her. It's one of the reasons she's risen through the ranks. I'll call her Nadia. When she found out I was doing this project, Nadia told me the story of something that had changed her early on. She apparently was working in a different company for a very, very harsh boss. This woman who was her boss was very bad manager, was constantly ridiculing people, just a very bad management style. And Nadia and another colleague were getting the brunt of this woman's poor management. And Nadia every day would have the latest horror story with, her other colleague, and it was venting about it. And she noticed that her colleague never engaged. She would say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a bummer. I'm sorry that happened." But she would never answer back because that's half of what Nadia wanted. Nadia wanted the okay, and yours? She wanted to have the little gripe fest. And this woman one day, she reached over and she just touched her on the arm and stopped her as she was mid-flow about something else the boss had done. And she said, "Nadia, let me ask you a question. If you complain about our boss, does it change anything?" And Nadia went, "No, you're right. It doesn't change anything." And she leaned over and she said, "You're wrong. It does change something. It changes you." And she was so struck by that. She started to watch how her colleague responded. I have no idea whether her colleague was a follower of Jesus, but she acted that way. And it was something that Nadia wanted to be, and she began to emulate that, using this woman's example of responding in grace and kindness when there was injustice, of responding with sweetness when somebody was harsh, seeing the truth of the phrase of the proverb that a gentle answer turns away wrath. She watched that and eventually became more like that herself, and it's one of the reasons that she has become one of the most well-known, well-loved people in corporate America. Because of that, this is a powerful set of actions. It sounds so simple, but I would really encourage you to try it. It is a powerful, miraculous, supernatural thing that we do. The other thing that changes in us is that we realize when we start doing the 30-day kindness challenge, our eyes are opened to this, we realize we're really not as kind and sweet as we thought we were. I would ask people on the before surveys, how many times, let's just say they were doing it for a spouse, the 30-day kindness challenge. How often do you say words of affirmation? Do you praise this person? Do you say something positive? And the average guess was, I think I probably say something to this person about 2 to 3 times a day. That was the average guess. And then they actually started doing the 30-day kindness challenge and having to track it. And they realized, oh my gosh, it's more like 2 to 3 times a week. We just are blind to the fact that we are not as kind and sweet as we think we are. This becomes a training ground to do that. Now, there's all sorts of reasons that we're not as kind. And one of them is that we're not as affirming as we think we are. One of them, frankly, is that the other person, whoever you're doing this for, maybe it's your boyfriend or girlfriend, the roommate, whatever, that person could need something different as affirmation than you think of as affirmation or that you'd need. And you're busy giving them what would matter to you, and it just doesn't hit them much. This, we don't have time to get into it, but this travels into the direction of a lot of other stuff that I've done. I do a lot of work on helping guys and girls understand each other, men and women understand each other, doing these surveys to try to dig out what women don't get about men, men don't get about women. And this is an area I found that causes a ton of heartache, because we're often trying very hard in the wrong areas and missing each other, or we're actually hurting each other and we don't intend to. And I'll give you just a quick example. One of the things that we found that we as women, gals, listen up to this one, that we women tend not to know in our romantic relationships is that men need something very different, a very different type of affirmation in some ways. Now, all of us need all types of affirmation, of course. But it turns out there's an underlying insecurity and self-doubt that's different between men and women statistically, where women tend to be more likely to have this question in our hearts of, am I lovable, right? Am I special? Am I beautiful? Am I worthy of being loved for who I am on the inside? And so we love to hear the words of love. That's the affirmation that really makes a big difference. If my husband were to come up to me and say, I'm so glad I married you. Like, that just, fills everything up in me as a woman that in a way that really needs to be filled. As opposed to what often men most need, and again, this is generalization. Statistically, there's always exceptions, but statistically what we've found with the guys is that the insecurity and the question is completely different. The insecurity is more like, am I able? Am I adequate? Am I any good at what I do on the outside? As opposed to, am I worthy of being loved for who I am on the inside? Am I any good at what I do on the outside? So we did a big study. I wanted to find out what's the word of affirmation that you can say to a man that matters to him. Because I love you matters a lot to me as a woman, but it turns out to a guy it's just nice. It doesn't have the same big emotional impact. So I finally found it. I did a study of the happiest marriages. It took me 8 years to figure out what you can say to a guy that has that same statistical impact on him. I want to ask if any of the girls in the audience can guess it. It's a little phrase. Can anybody guess what the phrase is to tell a guy? Come on. What'd you say? Good job. That's good. That's not bad. Say it again. You're the best. Okay, it's coming from a guy, so it's getting closer. Yeah, exactly. Guess what it is? It's thank you. Good job. Thank you. Seriously, gals, listen. To a guy, I know that sounds absolutely crazy to us as women. To a guy, the word of affirmation is, I saw what you did, that little thing. Thanks for changing the light bulbs for me. Little thing. Thanks for picking up my notes from my roommate because I'd forgotten to bring them. Thanks for doing that. Little day-to-day stuff. It says, I noticed what you did, and it was good, and I appreciate it. It turns out that fills up a man in ways we have no idea. I actually shared this at a women's conference right after I got the results back from the survey. And this one woman marched out of the room as I was sharing it, and I was thinking she was so offended. She comes up to me at the book table afterwards, and her eyes were red. She wasn't offended. She'd been crying. She was convicted. She said, I realized I never tell my husband thank you. Just that morning on the way to the women's conference, she'd waltzed by her husband as he was putting up a light fixture or something, and he'd been working on this for hours, and he was sweating, and she's like, it might have been a 6 curse word job, and trying really hard. And she's like, it didn't even occur to me to say thank you. I just waltzed by him and said, bye, honey. And so she ran out into the lobby and she texted him. She said, honey, I realized I didn't say thank you for that. You take such good care of us, and I really appreciate it. I can't wait to see you later, talk to you later. And she, sent the text. She comes up to me later and she shows me the text string on her phone, and it says, who are you and what have you done with my wife? She's like, I need to work on this. I'm like, we all need to work on this. It's a big reason we don't give affirmation and praise as often as we think we do, that we're not as kind as we think we are, is that we're maybe focusing on stuff that would matter to us, but it doesn't matter so much to the other person. There's all sorts of reasons. There's another way that this changes us, just really briefly, and it does show us that we have a lot more negativity that comes out every day than we realized. It's kind of icky, actually. Once you realize this, you're not allowed to be negative to this person. You're not allowed to say anything negative to or about them. And suddenly you realize how often you do. And you wouldn't have known it before. I started cataloging the types of negativity when I was trying to figure out the list. There's 7 different types of negativity. Everybody has at least one of them. And we're often very blind to it. Mine is exasperation. I realize I get exasperated with my kids all the time. And I don't realize I'm saying, you're an idiot, right? I would never say that out loud, but that's what I'm saying. You start working on this, I can guarantee you, you're going to see this come up everywhere. I was on the phone with a financial services company, and it was one of those really frustrating conversations where it should have taken 5 minutes to fix my little problem, and it took an hour of being disconnected over and over and again. It was just so frustrating. I had to repeat myself over and over, and I stopped hiding my irritation. Let's just say it nicely. And I'm like giving clipped answers, and I'm sorry, I've had to answer this 5 times now. And finally get to the end of the calls. There was a woman who finally can figure out how to fix it, and I apologize. I'm like, I'm sorry, this is so frustrating. She's like, I understand. She finishes. Have I resolved everything to your satisfaction, Mrs. Feldhahn? Yes, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to serve you. And oh, by the way, I loved your book. Painful. And you get confronted as you start to realize there's ways that you're unkind and you didn't realize it. I just want to leave you with the encouragement that if we do this, if we live in the way that Jesus asks us to live, there is power in that. There is power to change our culture in huge ways. Not those people out there that need to change, but we that need to change. And the power that comes from that is enormous. Okay, I'll leave you with these great words of wisdom from the great sage of the Marvel comic books, Uncle Ben. Anybody see Spider-Man? Okay, thank you. What Uncle Ben told Peter Parker, look, listen, it's us. We've been given a lot of power to make a difference in people's lives. Just like what Uncle Ben told Peter Parker, right? You've been given great power. And with great power comes great responsibility. So let's use that responsibility well, okay? Thanks, guys.